When one looks at this growth curve of the human population, one can see that once it started to increase exponentially, this rise is what we would call unsustainable. It simply can't be sustained. If human population continued to grow at this rate, it would not be long, say, a couple hundred years, before there wasn't room to stand for new people. And so obviously, this is a growth rate which has to change in the future. It simply cannot be sustained. In the same way, if you were to look at the growth of petroleum use through the 70s and 1980s, if you look at this upwards curve, one could see that this would not be sustainable if continued in the long run. There are limited finite resources of petroleum. And so therefore, if petroleum continued to be used at that level, then simply that would not be sustainable. And so as we can discuss environmental issues, this idea of sustainability comes into play, that the way in which we live could be sustainable if this is something which can be maintained for long periods of time, because obviously humanity has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, 200 to 300,000 years. And we would like it to be around for quite a bit more time. And so therefore I have, a series of videos in this playlist, which then, considers the idea of living sustainably. Because in addition to finding more oil or developing more sources of energy, another resource is simply to use less. If we were to conserve and live more sustainably, that has the same net end as finding more gas, burning more coal without the pollution. And so in this video, I asked my students to just, consider this individual who's obviously buying things that they don't need, driving a larger vehicle than they need, letting the vehicle run while shopping, etc. These are not things that have to be done. And if one were then to limit these activities, then this would be a more sustainable lifestyle. And I deal with this topic in a couple of different ways. So one of the things which is more sustainable when it comes to, say, transportation is to get vehicles which are more and more fuel efficient. So if vehicles require less petroleum to drive the same distance, that obviously this will make petroleum reserves last longer and reduce pollution. So driving fuel efficient vehicles is more sustainable than inefficient vehicles. Now in this, there's an interesting concept where we typically measure vehicles with miles per gallon, and that is certainly useful. But there is another metric that we could use, and one could argue that it would be a better use. Another metric that we could use is gallons of gas per 100 miles. And here's just an example of why that metric might be more useful. Which would be better for the environment, if we replace this vehicle, which drives 10 miles an hour, or 10 miles per gallon, with a vehicle that drives 20 miles per gallon, replacing this vehicle, which drives 20 miles per gallon, with one which drives 33, or replacing this vehicle, which gets 33 miles per gallon, with one that gets 50 miles per gallon. Obviously, you'd want to say, oh, well, that one. Well, this is excellent. I mean, obviously getting 50 miles per gallon or 33 miles per gallon, this is very good. And the more vehicles which had more fuel efficiency, this would obviously be the most sustainable. But if I'm wording the question, which of these replacements has the greatest benefit for the environment? The answer is this one. And the answer is this individual, if their old car is getting using 3 gallons of gas to drive 100 miles, and their new car uses 2 gallons of gas, then every 100 miles, they will save 1 gallon of gas. This person with their new car will save 2 gallons of gas. This person with their new vehicle will save 5 gallons of gas. So if we were to measure gallons per 100 miles, that in many cases would be a better metric to measure how sustainably our vehicles are. So focusing on taking these cars and replacing them with cars which get 50 miles per gallon, that would certainly be good, but actually we would make a greater impact on the environment and fuel efficiency if we replaced these vehicles with ones which got 20 miles per gallon. So that's just a different way of looking at of sustainability. And so we could apply this idea of sustainability to lots of aspects of how we live. So as I'll mention again later, many of our appliances in our homes can be more efficient than they are. Now, let's say an appliance in your house needs to be replaced. I mean, certainly you shouldn't go out and replace appliances which are working just fine, because that is using more resources than you need to. But let's say that your refrigerator breaks or your washing machine breaks, etc., and then you replace it with one which bears the name Energy Star. Energy Star appliances are those which are more sustainable and more efficient. So an Energy Star washing machine over the course of its lifetime would, if we could replace all washing machines with Energy Star, that would save hundreds of millions of dollars in energy costs, millions of kilowatts of electricity, and use billions fewer gallons of water. And so we obviously need washing machines, but some washing machines would be better for the environment than others. And then there are ways that we could run our washing machines, which would be more sustainable. And so sustainability is, in a sense, a lifestyle. So how do we go about, our day and, live in a way which has a lesser impact on the world? This could be using fewer of the world's resources, using less fuel, creating less carbon dioxide, and lessening our carbon footprint, for example. And many of the changes can be small ones. And so if we were to simply replace our light bulbs with more efficient light bulbs, then this would have an enormous impact on the amount of electricity which were used. If we could do this in the households of the United States, then $600 million of energy would be saved, and we would save enough electricity to light 3 million homes per year and prevent billions of pounds of release of greenhouse gases. When we look at the way that we live, we could live indoors with more light than we need to, heating our homes warmer than we need to, going shopping and getting lots of stuff and using a lot of electricity. Or we could then spend more time, hiking outdoors and not, using, bringing into our lifestyle things which need a lot of stuff or, use a lot of energy. And so there are lots of ways in which we could live more sustainably. When it comes to food, one of the easy ones would be to look at the amount of waste. And so, as I mentioned in a previous video, the idea of green waste is that we discard an incredible amount of our food. And so this is just wasted. And when we think of, how much energy and fertilizer and pesticide and greenhouse gases, et cetera, were spent in the, the growing of the food, the farm machinery, the transport across the country. If this garbage ends up in a landfill, that produces methane, which, can make worsen the greenhouse gas um, conditions. And so if a third of the food grown in the world is not consumed, more than 1 billion tons, there is an incredible waste here. And so when we shop, we could then shop in a way which will discourage waste, and use less food. And so therefore that would be less area, which we need, fewer rainforests need to be cut down for agriculture, less, grassland in the United States converted to cropland, et cetera, less water, which is used, et cetera. And so that is a way in which we can live more sustainably. Just be conscious of the price that we pay for waste, and material that is being waste. And in many localities, food waste can represent 20% of municipal waste. And so obviously we can live more sustainably by wasting less. When we think of our diet, I have a silly video which goes through this individual who's eating far more than he needs to, eating a diet which is very rich in meat, of the vegetables being eaten, ones which are exotic and transported from a great distance. But there are many ways which one could eat more sustainably. And so once again, just very simple choices in your everyday life can end up having an impact on resources used, et cetera. So instead of, fruits which are eaten out of season and transported a great distance, one could eat more locally, support local farmers, and eat that which is just harvested. So when asparagus is in season, to eat more asparagus. One of the easy ways is that we could consider the amount of meat in our diet. And so if you were to look at the amount of meat in the diet of an average American in a year, it's 3 times the global average. And in many areas, the average consumption of meat is 10 pounds or less. And so the average American can be eating 27 times the amount of meat, which is average in some parts of the world. Now, as I'll go into in just a second, the more meat we eat, the less sustainable that is in general, although, certainly I'll qualify that. And just saying that there are many options here. So I'm a vegetarian. And so one doesn't have to eat meat. And then if you do eat meat, one can certainly eat different kinds of meat. And so, for example, chickens, which are raised locally, or fish, which are caught locally, actually have a very small carbon footprint compared to, say, beef. All right. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to all of this. So, for example, fish could be caught from distant parts of the world and transported. So the carbon footprint of, say, fish would depend on what type of fish and where they were caught, et cetera. And obviously, eating beef can vary as well if it's being transported across the country, or if the cow was raised at the farm up the road. But if you were to consider, say, just beef, for example, how much water does it take to get a pound of protein from beef versus a pound of plant protein? How much fossil fuel goes into this? Well, one finds that you could get far more protein, which could feed far more people, that if instead of eating beef, that one were now getting rice or soy. All right, and one gets 50 times the amount of protein from rice or soy with the same amount of water that gets, say 1 kilogram of beef or of protein from beef, etc. And so the choices that we make in our diet, how much meat is in our diet, which sources of meat are in our diet. This has a large impact on the amount of water which is needed to raise this, the amount of carbon dioxide, which is produced as a greenhouse gas, the amount of fossil fuel, the amount of fertilizer, the amount of pesticide, used, and so we can choose to live more sustainably. If we were to compare dietary greenhouse gases between different foods, and the numbers here are being given in kilograms of carbon equivalents, one can see that the person who is eating plant-based meat substitutes has the lowest amount of carbon dioxide equivalents. And so if we're measuring this carbon dioxide, is coming in many forms, like the fuel that was used to raise this or raise the feed for the animals, etc. But this individual here, look at how much carbon dioxide is entering the air because of what they eat. Someone who's feeding primarily on chicken and eggs more. And as I go through this video, you can see that seafood varies, as once again locally caught fish very very little, as opposed to fish transported a great distance. Beef varies, but is significantly more. Some foods are even more likely to contribute to climate change than beef, such as lamb. And so the carbon footprint of different food items can vary. I follow that up in this video with other examples. If you're comparing people who eat different types of diet, and once again, this can occur in different parts of the world, there are varying effects on the environment. So for example, I lived in Paraguay while I was in the Peace Corps, and Paraguayans eat a great deal of meat. And if one were to say, what would you like for dinner? Well, let's have chicken or let's have beef. You can literally have a scenario where the chicken that you're going to eat for dinner is something that you then have to catch in your backyard, or walk up the street and purchase a cow from the neighbor. If you're going to have a party, you purchase a cow, you slaughter the cow at your house in your backyard, you prepare it, you have a party, everyone comes over. Well, that's very, very different from now having beef raised in one part of the country, very often in arid areas. So there's irrigation, or there's sorry, this isn't playing. So if you were to just look at this feedlot, so this is a site out west, but much of that beef was now destined for cities on, say, the East Coast, or cities in California. So it was going to be transported a great distance, and so that's a very different type of environmental impact. And so if, once again, we could compare the amount of carbon dioxide produced with different types of diet, those with a high meat diet would result in more carbon dioxide released. But note that there are then differences between different countries. So these were comparisons in the United Kingdom. Whereas one could have, say, a high meat diet in the United States could end up being far more unsustainable than a high meat diet somewhere else in the world. A vegetarian in Germany might still be producing more carbon dioxide than, say, a vegetarian in India. And once again, getting into the idea of how much transport is involved. And so if you were to look at the numbers, it's a little bit more nuanced. One can't say that eating meat produces this much carbon dioxide, or eating a plant-based diet does that. But you can see some of the changes here. And finally, I just wanted to add, when I teach in my classes, I pull images off of the internet, including using the videos that you've just seen, which are ones that I make, just to stress that conservation is a key. And so we can save energy and live more sustainably, not necessarily by finding more energy sources, but just by using less. The two accomplish the same, and using less releases less energy. And so, for example, there's this idea of green architecture. So when we build our homes, there are different ways to build our homes, so that a larger home is going to use more heat to the heat and light, etc. The way it's oriented, your house, it can receive more light, and therefore, instead of you heating it with your electric bill, you can then just use natural sunlight to heat it. And so houses can be constructed in such a way that they use less energy. Your outdoor lights could have motion sensors so that you don't leave them on constantly. New windows, if you replace old windows with new windows, the energy savings can be great. If you then caulk around the cracks, etc., or use plastic sheeting in winter, then this can greatly cut down on the energy costs. So our light bulbs that we choose can use less energy. Once again, motion detectors can be of great use. We use a lot of energy heating water, and in winter, the hot water heater then is inefficient, but we can put insulating jackets around hot water heaters, or set them at lower temperatures, and this can help. Our shower heads can use less water. Our furnaces can be serviced and cleaned. We can lower the temperature that we maintain our houses a bit, or raise it in summer to limit air conditioning. So rather than using air conditioning, just pulling the drapes can then cut down on air conditioning. We can defrost our freezers. We can washing machines and dishwashers when with full loads. In some areas, running them in off-peak hours then saves on electrical capacity, which is built. So if you wash your clothes at night in some areas, that's better than washing it during the day when the office buildings, et cetera, are all running air conditioning, et cetera. Once again, if you ever replace an appliance, if you look for a brand which is listed as Energy Star, then that will limit the amount of energy which it uses, and then often then save money for you. If you were to go through Energy Star battery chargers, use a third less electricity than standard models. Energy Star clothes washers can cut energy costs by a third. Energy Star dehumidifiers can save $20 per year. Energy Star dishwashers can reduce the energy usage more than 40%. Energy Star refrigerators use only half the energy, etc. And so even if an Energy Star appliance is a little more expensive at the outset, then over the life of this appliance, it could actually save money. So one can save money and help the environment at the same time. I have an electric vehicle. It's a hybrid, so it does use gas, but because I use electricity as much as I can, since the purchase of the car, I've gotten about 70 miles per gallon on average because of the contribution that the electric has made. My house, the electricity comes from wind. All right, so literally there is no burning of coal, which is supporting the household, and and obviously if we could get into wind energy and off peak hours, et cetera, but that's a separate discussion. And then even some of the petroleum that I would otherwise use is being displaced by wind. And so, that is a more sustainable, way to approach energy. Obviously, carpooling, is better because the fewer vehicles on the road, the less carbon dioxide. So these individuals could fit into this bus, but if everyone drove their separate car, that's far more gasoline, far more pollution, etc. We could ask about other things like the amount of stuff that we have. The more stuff that we have, that means the greater the shipping costs, the greater the manufacturing, etc. And so we can live in a way that simply can't be continued. All right. So if we, eat as much as we can in diets which are, rich in beef, if we, get lots of stuff, you use lots of energy. This is a problem for future generations. Humanity just can't sustain that type of lifestyle. But we all can make personal choices. Very small choices about how we light our homes, where we set our thermostats, which appliances we purchase, what we eat at meals, what we do for recreation. All of these could then encourage a more sustainable way of life.